A front door left wide open in the dead of night is usually the first terrifying. This was not a simple case of a confused elderly person wandering off into the dark. The officers stared down at the concrete surface and discovered a distinct drop of blood. It was a small but unmistakable crimson stain against the pale stone. Subsequent forensic testing would later confirm the absolute worst fears of the family. The blood DNA perfectly matched the 84-year-old victim. This was no longer a simple missing persons case. This was a violent crime scene. The discovery of the blood immediately elevated the urgency of the investigation to a critical level. The local authorities quickly turned their attention to the digital eyes watching over the estate. The house was equipped with a modern doorbell camera system designed to record anyone approaching the front door. The investigators pulled the digital footage from the system and began to review the recordings from the previous night. What they saw on that screen sent a deep chill through the entire department. This was an allegedly calculated and violent extraction of a highly vulnerable target. The digital timestamp on the video footage read exactly 12 o'clock in the morning, just 10 minutes after the son-in-law had safely dropped her off. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness and stepped onto the brightly lit porch. The suspect was a male individual standing approximately 5 feet and 9 inches tall. He was completely concealing his face behind a heavy mask, hiding every single identifying feature from the high-definition lens. He was wearing a dark and nondescript backpack slung over his shoulders. But the most terrifying detail of all was clearly visible on his right hip. The masked suspect was carrying a visible firearm secured tightly in a holster. This alleged heavily armed individual had stalked his way up to the front door of an 84-year-old woman living alone. The silent video footage captured the masked suspect raising his hands toward the camera lens. He aggressively smashed the doorbell device, violently destroying the equipment and abruptly cutting off the digital recording. The screen went completely black. Why would a sophisticated extortionist demanding massive payouts in untraceable cryptocurrency choose? That sudden burst of static was the exact moment the armed and suspected predator breached the sanctuary of the home. The chilling reality of the situation was now undeniable. A heavily armed and masked suspect had allegedly forcibly entered the house, terrorized a frail grandmother, and dragged her out into the freezing night. He had violently pulled an 84-year-old woman from her safe environment, leaving behind a trail of blood on the concrete steps. The suspected predator believed he had executed the perfect extraction. He had violently smashed the security camera to destroy the digital evidence of his intrusion. He thought the darkness would hide his identity and cover his tracks. But the violent suspect was dangerously wrong. In his rushed attempt to destroy the security device, he failed to realize that the digital footage had already been instantly transmitted and securely saved to a remote server. The violent destruction of the camera did not erase the evidence. To target an 84-year-old grandmother living a quiet and reclusive life in the suburbs, it only solidified the timeline of the attack. The masked suspect had unknowingly given the federal investigators a crystal clear image of his physical build, his clothing, his weapon, and his backpack. He thought he was completely invisible, but his terrifying silhouette was now the most hunted image in the entire country. The authorities had a picture of the suspect, but they still had absolutely no idea where he had taken his vulnerable victim. The chilling image of the armed man standing on the porch is a haunting reminder of how quickly safety can be shattered. The family is living a waking nightmare, desperately hoping for a miracle, while staring at the terrifying footage of the man who took her. The clock is ticking faster than ever. If you want to help the authorities identify this armed suspect and bring this missing woman home, keep watching and analyzing the evidence with us. And make sure you are subscribed to Seth Crime Stories so you never miss a critical update on this active manhunt. The sheer brutality and targeted nature of the abduction immediately triggered a massive law enforcement response. The local police department quickly realized they were dealing with a highly sophisticated and dangerous suspect. The answer lies in her bloodline. She is the mother of a prominent television anchor. They officially requested the assistance of the federal authorities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately assumed control of the sprawling crime scene and launched a comprehensive national manhunt. The federal agents began their exhaustive investigation by systematically eliminating the most obvious suspects. In many complex domestic cases, the investigators must first look closely at the immediate family members. The agents conducted intense and thorough interviews with the prominent television anchor and her husband. They heavily scrutinized the timeline of the son-in-law who had driven the victim home that night. After reviewing alibis and checking digital communication records, the federal agents officially cleared the entire family of any suspicion or involvement in the horrific crime. The family members were entirely innocent victims caught in a terrifying waking nightmare. They immediately began cooperating fully with the federal agents, providing every possible detail about the daily habits and medical needs of the missing 84-year-old woman. And that makes her the ultimate leverage in a high-stakes game of life and death. With the family completely ruled out as potential suspects, the federal investigators turned their full attention to the physical evidence left behind at the estate in the Catalina Foothills. They painstakingly reconstructed the exact timeline of events stretching from 50 minutes past 9 o'clock at night to the early hours of the morning. They analyzed the exact angle of the forced entry and studied the specific path the masked suspect took to avoid the exterior security lighting. The agents brought in specialized forensic teams to meticulously process every single square inch of the living room and the kitchen. They carefully dusted the untouched cell phone and the intact leather wallet for any trace of foreign fingerprints. They photographed the small plastic bottle of crucial heart medication from every possible angle, treating it as the most heartbreaking piece of evidence in the entire house. The local authorities and the federal agents worked seamlessly together to establish a massive perimeter around the gated community. They conducted extensive door-to-door canvassing operations, desperately asking the wealthy neighbors if they had seen any suspicious vehicles or heard any unusual noises during the midnight hours. The clock is ticking down rapidly right now because this is an active and ongoing federal investigation. But the sprawling layout of the luxury neighborhood and the heavy insulation of the multi-million-dollar homes meant that no one had heard a single sound. The armed suspect had moved through the darkness like an absolute phantom. The entire investigative task force seemed to be hitting a massive and impenetrable brick wall. The masked suspect had left almost no physical trace of his identity behind. He had successfully vanished into the cold Arizona night with a fragile and highly vulnerable hostage. The days began to painfully drag on without a single verified sighting of the missing grandmother. The federal agents were working entirely around the clock, chasing down thousands of desperate tips from the panicked public, but every single lead eventually turned into a devastating dead end. The silence from the alleged perpetrator was incredibly deafening. Usually, in cases of targeted abduction, the criminals immediately establish direct contact to make their specific demands known. The victim needs her medication to survive each passing day. But for several agonizing days, the phone lines remained completely silent. The family waited in sheer agony, sitting by the phone and desperately praying for any sign that she was still alive. The federal agents began to deeply fear the absolute worst possible outcome. They worried that the frail 84-year-old woman had already succumbed to the stress of the violent abduction or the dangerous lack of her essential daily medication. The immense pressure on the federal task force was building to an absolute breaking point. The national media was heavily broadcasting the chilling security footage of the masked suspect every single hour. But the intense public exposure was yielding absolutely zero concrete results. The highly trained federal investigators were completely baffled by the flawless execution of the silent extraction. They were desperately waiting for the suspect to make just one single mistake. The authorities are desperately racing against time to find her before it is too late. And then the agonizing silence was finally broken in the most unexpected and terrifying way possible. The critical breakthrough did not come from a phone call to the family or a hidden piece of physical evidence at the crime scene. It came directly to the media. The investigative teams had prepared themselves for a traditional ransom demand, expecting the criminal to reach out to the wealthy family through a burner phone or a handwritten letter. But the highly sophisticated suspect completely bypassed the federal agents and the grieving family. The alleged perpetrator decided to control the entire narrative by contacting the national press directly. This terrifying digital maneuver instantly changed the entire trajectory of the federal investigation. The landscape of the investigation fundamentally shifted in early February when chilling communications bypassed traditional law enforcement channels entirely. Major media outlets, including the National Entertainment Network TMZ and the local television station KOLD, suddenly received terrifying correspondence. If you want to follow every breaking development and uncover the truth behind this active kidnapping as the facts are verified in real time, the messages were not physical notes mailed to a precinct, but rather digital communications carefully routed to newsrooms. These alleged messages contained explicit demands that elevated the stakes of the crisis to unprecedented heights. The sender was aggressively demanding a ransom payment in the millions of dollars. The currency of choice was not cash left in a duffel bag at a predetermined drop location. The extortionist specifically demanded the massive payout in Bitcoin. This specific requirement completely altered the profile of the suspected perpetrator. Law enforcement was no longer just hunting a common burglar who stumbled into a kidnapping. They were now tracking a supposedly sophisticated digital extortionist who understood how to utilize decentralized cryptocurrency networks to mask financial transactions and effectively launder illicit funds across international borders. The demand for millions of dollars in Bitcoin suggested a high level of technical proficiency and a deep understanding of modern cybercrime tactics. Sign that something has gone horribly wrong inside a seemingly peaceful home. You need to subscribe to Seth Crime Stories right now. But the digital letters contain more than just financial demands. To prove that they were not simply opportunistic scammers capitalizing on a highly publicized tragedy, the authors of the correspondence included highly specific and deeply disturbing proof-of-life details. The letters reportedly contained accurate descriptions of specific personal items that had been broken inside the residence during the initial abduction. These were intricate details about the interior of the property that had never been released to the public. The family reviewed the alleged ransom communications and expressed a strong belief that the terrifying letters were indeed authentic. While the authorities have not officially verified the exact identity of the sender, the presence of those unreleased details about the damaged property strongly suggests the communications originated from the actual people holding the victim captive. The sheer psychological terror of receiving these demands through public media channels rather than private negotiation lines demonstrates a profound level of cruelty. The kidnappers were seemingly taunting the authorities and applying maximum public pressure on the relatives. We only deal in the cold, hard facts of the case, and we will bring you the updates the very second this ongoing investigation breaks wide open. The digital nature of the ransom demand created a massive complication for the tracking teams. Bitcoin transactions occur on a public ledger, but the identities behind the digital wallets can be carefully obscured through tumbling services and anonymizing networks. The suspected kidnapper was effectively trying to drag the physical investigation into an untraceable digital abyss. The contrasting elements of this crime are deeply perplexing. On one hand, you have a physical abduction requiring forced entry, the suppression of a victim, and a chaotic physical extraction. On the other hand, you have a digital ransom strategy relying on advanced encryption and cryptocurrency mechanics. This bizarre intersection of a brutally physical crime and a highly technical extortion scheme represents a terrifying new breed of criminal behavior. The perpetrators were seemingly intelligent enough to demand untraceable digital money, but simultaneously reckless enough to commit a high-risk home invasion in a wealthy suburban neighborhood. The authorities were racing to trace the origin of the digital messages, deploying elite cyber units to analyze the routing data and uncover the digital footprint of the extortionists. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the crucial updates on the desperate search for this missing woman. Every single passing hour amplified the sheer dread of the situation. The kidnappers had established their financial demands and proven their intimate knowledge of the crime scene, but they had not provided any verified proof that the captive was still safe. The digital trail was incredibly murky and the clock was relentlessly running out. Law enforcement agencies were utilizing every available technological resource to crack the encryption and locate the source of the emails. As the cyber investigation intensified, the focus also remained fiercely on the physical evidence left behind. The kidnapper had presented themselves as a digital mastermind demanding cryptocurrency, but physical crime scenes always betray the people who create them. If you want to follow the twists and turns of this unprecedented cyber extortion case as the digital trail unfolds, make sure to subscribe to Seth Crime Stories right now. We will bring you the verified updates the moment the authorities break the encryption or trace the digital wallets. The details of how this terrifying night unfolded will make you question the safety of your own. The digital facade of the mastermind was about to crack because an extortionist who relies on computers can still make a devastatingly simple mistake in the real world. The physical reality of the crime scene was hiding a colossal error that no amount of digital encryption could ever erase. The arrogance of the digital demand was about to collide with a monumental physical blunder. This monumental physical blunder would finally give the desperate investigators the tangible lead they desperately needed to hunt down the ruthless predator. The monumental break in the case did not come from a computer screen, but from the dirt and gravel surrounding the immediate perimeter of the estate. While the cyber teams were buried in complex algorithms attempting to trace the virtual currency demands, the local sheriff from Pima County stepped in front of the press and delivered a definitive public statement. The sheriff officially declared that this horrifying incident was a completely targeted attack. The authorities firmly believed the heavily armed suspect had explicitly selected this specific residence and this particular vulnerable individual with extreme prejudice and meticulous forethought. Locked doors and the security systems you trust to keep the outside world away from your family. The law enforcement officials completely dismissed any lingering theories about a random act of violence. This was absolutely not a random crime of opportunity or a burglary gone wrong. It was a highly calculated strike designed to secure a high-value hostage for immense financial gain. With the targeted nature of the crime officially confirmed, the forensic investigators began to brutally scrutinize the visual evidence they possessed. They isolated every single frame of the surviving surveillance footage to analyze the exact gear worn by the alleged intruder. They focused intensely on the dark bag slung over the shoulder of the suspect. After consulting with retail experts and manufacturing databases, the investigative team made a stunning determination. According to reports, the specific style of the bag carried by the masked man was an exclusive item sold only at Walmart retail locations across the country. This critical piece of information narrowed the search parameters significantly. Law enforcement could now potentially track nationwide inventory records, review local store purchasing history. The world before the horrifying events of late January 2026 was defined by a quiet and highly structured routine and cross-reference massive databases of credit card transactions in the weeks leading up to the targeted abduction. But the exclusive retail backpack was only a secondary clue compared to the massive forensic discovery waiting just beyond the property line. As the dedicated search teams meticulously combed the surrounding desert landscape and the paved streets of the gated community, they stumbled upon an item that completely shattered the impenetrable facade of the digital extortionist. Discarded carelessly near the crime scene was a single solitary glove. The authorities carefully retrieved the item and immediately compared its distinct pattern and material to the visual evidence from the destroyed security device. The physical characteristics of the discarded glove perfectly matched the hand coverings worn by the suspect in the recorded video. This was an absolutely catastrophic failure on the part of the alleged kidnapper, a criminal mastermind who utilized sophisticated tumbling software to demand untraceable crypto had panicked and literally dropped a piece of his own clothing while fleeing the scene of the violent crime. An 84-year-old woman living alone in a gated and heavily secured luxury community in the Catalina Foothills represents a very specific kind of vulnerability. The discarded glove was immediately secured in an evidence bag and rushed directly to a specialized forensic laboratory. The technicians are currently subjecting the fabric to advanced biological testing. They are desperately searching for microscopic skin cells, microscopic droplets of sweat, or any other biological material that could yield a viable profile. If the suspect was sweating under the intense pressure of the violent extraction, that single dropped glove could contain the exact genetic blueprint needed to identify him. The forensic scientists are methodically extracting every possible microscopic fiber, knowing that a single isolated cell could completely unravel the entire extortion plot and lead them straight to the hidden location. The sheer contrast in this investigation is absolutely staggering. You have a criminal demanding millions in decentralized internet money who is simultaneously waiting to be unmasked by a simple piece of fabric dropped in the dirt. This monumental forensic breakthrough could finally tear away the mask and expose the true identity of the ruthless predator who planned this terrifying operation. The entire trajectory of this massive national manhunt now hinges entirely on the microscopic biological results currently processing inside that secure laboratory. She relied heavily on a pacemaker to keep her heart beating steadily, and she required daily doses of specialized medication just to maintain her fragile health. Will the genetic material on that dropped fabric finally give the authorities a name and an address? Make sure to hit that subscribe button for Seth Crime Stories right now so you do not miss the breaking DNA results. We will be the absolute first to update you the second the laboratory confirms the identity of the suspect and issues an official arrest warrant. This single piece of physical evidence is the exact breakthrough the investigators have been praying for since the terrifying ordeal began. The tension is currently at an absolute breaking point as the entire nation waits for the science to catch up to the criminal. The digital ghost who terrorized a vulnerable woman is about to be dragged violently back into the harsh light of reality by his own careless physical mistake. The discovery of the discarded glove brought a sudden surge of momentum to the agonizing investigation, but it did not immediately solve the most terrifying problem. The vulnerable hostage was still missing, and her fragile health was deteriorating with every single passing second. She remained separated from her essential medical supplies. Realizing that the biological testing process would take agonizing time to complete, the federal authorities decided to aggressively escalate their public strategy. They needed to compel someone in the inner circle of the suspect to turn him in immediately. Her movements around the large house were slow and deliberate. To achieve this, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced an absolutely staggering financial incentive. They officially offered a massive reward of $1 million for any verified information leading directly to the safe recovery of the victim and the subsequent capture of the alleged perpetrator. This incredibly large sum of money was strategically designed to completely shatter any loyalties the masked suspect might be relying upon. $1 million is more than enough money to make an accomplice turn on their partner or to convince a suspicious roommate to finally call the authorities. The immense reward transformed the search from a specialized law enforcement operation into a massive civilian manhunt. Every single person in the country was now actively looking for the man with the exclusive retail backpack. Alongside the aggressive federal push, the high-profile family released an incredibly emotional and desperate public plea. They utilized their massive media platform not to express anger, but to beg for basic human mercy. They directly addressed the captors on national television, pleading with them to understand the severe medical reality of the situation. She did not drive late at night. She did not take spontaneous trips. The family emphasized that their loved one was extremely fragile and desperately needed her daily prescriptions just to survive the intense physical trauma of the captivity. They promised full cooperation in exchange for her safe and immediate return, desperately hoping that even a hardened criminal might possess a shred of remaining humanity. The sheer emotional weight of their televised plea resonated deeply across the entire country, further intensifying the massive public pressure on the unknown suspects. The combined force of the $1 million federal reward and the heartbreaking family appeals created an unprecedented level of national attention. The wanted posters, featuring the shadowy figure from the doorbell footage, were plastered across every major news network and shared millions of times across various social platforms. The entire country was essentially holding its collective breath, waiting for the massive financial bounty to produce a viable lead. The law enforcement tip lines were suddenly flooded with thousands of calls from citizens claiming to recognize the specific gait of the suspect or the style of his dark clothing. The federal agents worked tirelessly to systematically verify or debunk every single reported sighting, sifting through an absolute mountain of civilian data in search of the one crucial piece of information that could crack the case wide open. But inside this sprawling $1 million estate, nestled in the quiet and exclusive Catalina Foothills, every single aspect of her daily existence was predictable and safe. But despite the enormous sum of money on the table and the relentless national coverage, the actual location of the captive remained a terrifying mystery. The sprawling investigation had successfully uncovered crucial forensic clues and established the targeted nature of the brutal crime. But the ultimate goal was still agonizingly out of reach. The authorities possessed the digital ransom demands, the exclusive retail bag identification, and the potentially explosive biological material from the discarded glove. Yet the empty house in the wealthy subdivision remained profoundly silent. The incredible tension of the ongoing crisis refused to dissipate because the most important question still lacked an answer. The investigators knew exactly how the violent extraction was executed, and they were rapidly closing in on the identity of the person who orchestrated the terrifying plot, but they still did not know where he was hiding his fragile captive. The agonizing wait for the laboratory results and the frantic search for a willing informant kept the entire nation trapped in a state of suspended dread. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but the central piece was still missing in the darkness. This profound physical frailty is exactly what makes the nature of this crime so deeply unsettling. The desperate hope for a peaceful resolution continued to clash violently with the terrifying reality of the ongoing and brutal extortion plot. What this case teaches us about the evolution of extortion is deeply disturbing and requires a fundamental shift in how we view personal security. From a practical standpoint, this terrifying ordeal highlights a critical vulnerability in modern smart home ecosystems. Relying entirely on a single exterior camera creates a dangerous illusion of impenetrable safety. As demonstrated by the violent destruction of the exterior surveillance lens, external hardware can be physically disabled in seconds by a determined predator. A comprehensive security strategy must include multiple overlapping layers of internal sensors and reinforced physical barriers that do not rely solely on wireless connections or exposed hardware. But looking beyond the technology, this ongoing investigation provides a chilling analytical framework regarding the shifting tactics of organized criminal enterprises. Historically, kidnappers targeted high net worth individuals directly, grabbing executives or wealthy figures for massive cash payouts. However, the modern digital landscape has fundamentally altered this dynamic. Criminals are now increasingly targeting the most vulnerable relatives of high-profile figures, recognizing that a fragile dependent represents the ultimate emotional leverage. A woman in her condition physically cannot just walk out of her home in the middle of these soft targets are often less protected and physically incapable of resisting a sudden assault. When you combine this brutal psychological strategy with the anonymity of decentralized cryptocurrency demands, you witness a terrifying mutation of criminal behavior. The perpetrators can execute a devastating physical extraction while hiding behind layers of untraceable digital wallets, effectively paralyzing both the victimized family and the traditional financial tracking systems. This case definitively proves that modern cybercrime is no longer confined to data breaches and stolen passwords. The digital threat has aggressively crossed over into the physical world, bringing the ruthless mechanics of anonymous internet extortion directly to the front doorsteps of our most vulnerable citizens. The haunting reality of a fragile life, violently interrupted without warning, remains the most devastating aspect of this ongoing tragedy. While the brilliant forensic scientists desperately process the biological material extracted from the discarded glove, a terrified family continues to wait for a miracle that seems increasingly elusive. The night without her shoes, and leave the front door swinging open in the cold wind. What will ultimately happen when the sophisticated digital money trail goes completely cold and the perpetrators realize their physical identity is compromised? If you happen to recognize the distinct dark bag or the specific physical movements of the masked individual from the broadcasted footage, you must contact the federal tip line immediately because every second is critical. The massive financial reward is still active, and your single observation could be the key to bringing her safely home. This is Seth Crime Stories, and our commitment to uncovering the factual truth never stops. We will continuously monitor the DNA results and the cryptocurrency tracking efforts, and we will update you the very moment this massive federal manhunt reaches its inevitable conclusion. Stay vigilant, trust the verified facts, and never ignore the subtle signs of unseen danger in your own seemingly quiet and peaceful neighborhood. Her physical limitations confirm without a shadow of a doubt that she was allegedly taken against her will. You need to understand the absolute rigidity of her daily schedule to fully grasp the malicious intent of the person who took her. The suspected perpetrator did not just choose a random house to burglarize. They chose a specific home containing a specific woman who could not fight back and who could not run away. They knew that taking her would instantly command the attention of the national media and bring immense pressure upon her high-profile family. The tension in this case comes from the horrifying contrast between her peaceful and quiet reality and the violent disruption that shattered it. The suffocating silence was even more chilling because of the specific everyday items that were left behind on the kitchen counter. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, the routine seemed completely normal. At exactly 50 minutes past 9 o'clock at night, her son-in-law safely dropped her off at her residence. He watched her walk inside. He saw the heavy door close behind her. He knew she was safely locked inside the house, where she had spent countless peaceful evenings. The security cameras were active. The neighborhood was completely silent. Everything appeared to be exactly as it should be for an elderly woman settling in for a restful night of sleep. There was absolutely no indication that a predator was already calculating their next move in the darkness just beyond the glow of the porch light. The house was a fortress designed to keep danger firmly locked on the outside. But a fortress is only safe if the threat is not already systematically dismantling its defenses from the shadows. As the son-in-law drove away from the property, he believed he was leaving her in the safest place in the world. A personal cell phone rested exactly where it always did. He had no way of knowing that the quiet estate was about to become the center of a massive federal investigation. The profound silence of the neighborhood was not a blanket of security protecting the residents. It was merely the calm and breathless anticipation before a devastating storm. The true nightmare had not yet begun, but the trap was already fully set and waiting to be sprung. The heavy wooden door that closed at 50 minutes past 9 o'clock was supposed to be the final barrier between a vulnerable 84-year-old woman and the unpredictable dangers of the outside world. Instead, that very same door would soon become the focal point of a terrifying mystery. The peaceful isolation of the Catalina Foothills provided the perfect cover for a crime that would soon shock the entire nation. The security and comfort of the luxury estate had secretly transformed into a trap. The terrifying reality of the situation did not immediately register the following morning. A leather wallet remained completely untouched with cash and cards still safely tucked inside. It was Sunday, the 1st of February, 2026. The morning began with the exact same quiet predictability that defined the rest of her life. She was a devout woman who never missed her weekly religious services. Because of her advanced age and frail physical condition, she regularly attended a virtual church service online from the safety and comfort of her living room. But when the digital broadcast began that Sunday morning, her family noticed something highly unusual. She was not logged into the system. She was not participating in the service she loved so much. This single missed appointment was a massive departure from her deeply ingrained routine. It was the first undeniable red flag that something was terribly wrong. Her family immediately tried to contact her, but the phone calls went completely unanswered. The silence on the other end of the line quickly escalated their initial concern into sheer panic. And most terrifying of all, the essential daily heart medication required to keep an 84-year-old woman alive sat there in its small plastic bottle. By 56 minutes past 11 o'clock in the morning, the family could no longer wait for a response. They rushed to the estate in the Catalina Foothills to check on her well-being. When they arrived at the property, the scene that greeted them was profoundly disturbing. The heavy door that had been securely locked the night before was now standing wide open. The cold winter air was blowing freely into the silent house. They stepped inside and desperately called out her name, but the only response was the hollow echo of their own voices. The house was completely empty. They immediately checked the kitchen and found the terrifying evidence of a sudden and involuntary departure. Her personal cell phone was sitting perfectly still on the counter. Her leather wallet was fully intact and undisturbed. And there, sitting right next to the wallet, was the small plastic bottle of critical heart medication she absolutely needed to survive. The woman who needed those pills was completely gone. At exactly 3 minutes past 12 o'clock in the afternoon, the family made a frantic call to the emergency dispatchers. They pleaded for immediate help, explaining that an 84-year-old woman with severe medical dependencies had vanished into thin air. When the local police officers arrived at the scene, they initially treated the situation as a potential case of an elderly person wandering away from home due to confusion or a sudden medical emergency. They began searching the immediate perimeter of the sprawling estate, looking for any signs of the missing woman in the nearby bushes or along the quiet streets of the gated community. The officers walked through the silent rooms of the house, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. There were no obvious signs of a violent struggle inside the living room or the kitchen. The furniture was all in its proper place. The windows were completely intact. For a brief and agonizing moment, the authorities hoped they were simply dealing with a lost grandmother who would soon be found confused but safe in a neighbor's yard. She had vanished into the cold night air wearing nothing but her pajamas and without even taking the time to put on her shoes. They meticulously documented the untouched medication and the abandoned phone. They noted the clothes she had left behind, realizing with a sinking feeling that she was likely wearing nothing but thin pajamas and was walking entirely barefoot. The theory of a confused elderly woman wandering off quickly began to fall apart. A woman in her frail condition simply could not travel far on foot, especially not without her shoes or her glasses. The local police soon realized they were dealing with a scenario far darker than a simple medical wandering. They began to closely examine the exterior of the property, searching for any subtle clues that might explain how and why the heavy door had been opened. They scrutinized the front porch, the driveway, and the landscaping around the entrance. And that is exactly when the initial theory completely shattered. The officers looked down at the cold concrete of the front steps and found the horrifying truth. The chilling truth was hiding right there on the front porch.